I really want to thank you all for your time and thank you for giving the audience insights and lessons on inclusion, diversity, and allyship, and just things that they can take back and reflect on within themselves and within their companies and workspaces and everything. So I unfortunately have to move on, so I'm going to let you guys go, but thank you so much.
Thank you for
having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, you guys are so amazing. All right, so on a different topic, we are back at it again with one of our favorite moderators, Raja Schaar, who will be interviewing the CEO of IDEO, Sandy Speicher. And can you guys come to the stage? Sorry, that was a weird introduction, my bad. But yeah, let's see. All right, I see you guys. You guys are here. Hooray. I'm actually really looking forward to this interview. And so part of me doesn't want to ask what you're going to be doing and giving us an overview because I don't really want spoiler alerts. So I'm just going to jump off and just let you guys take over. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Mitzi. Hi, Sandy.
Hey, Raja.
How's it going?
It's going great. I really enjoyed today. So I just want to say thank you to Mitzi and thank you, Raja, for inviting me into this conversation.
Yay! I'm so excited that you're here. And honestly, I feel like, I've been scribbling things in my little notebook as I've been watching. I just think that all the speakers and panelists have just been so inspirational. So thanks again, Mitzi, for making this possible for us to come together in this way. So Sandy, we're here to talk today a little bit about the role of design organizations like IDEO and answering this question of where are the Black designers. So before we sort of get into that, I wanted you to have an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience and community to learn a little bit about your role within IDEO as CEO and your history there and your history with design.
Sure. Well, my background is in graphic design, and I started at IDEO about 15 years ago, 2004, 16 years ago. I actually started at IDEO as an intern. And so I've experienced a lot of different roles at IDEO, most of which was in the last decade, really building our education practice. This is where I taught a lot, where I learned a lot about actually a lot of the conversation that we're having today. And in August, I took on the role of CEO. So it's my first year.
Well, congratulations on your new position.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks. And maybe one thing is probably worth saying, because I do have a long history within IDEO, one of the things that I felt was really important to do before I stepped into the role and since was really focus internally and make sure that I'm sort of listening across the pulse of all of our different offices. We operate in many different countries, and just making sure that I really could represent all of the angles of IDEO. And I want to offer, just kind of as a beginning, that the kinds of things we're talking about today were present in all of those conversations. It plays out a bit differently in different countries, but these questions are on everyone's minds. And I felt really thankful that that people shared that with me, because it's not easy to surface that, especially when people are talking to a leader.
And I think also, I know that you're new in your position, and this is a time, like I also inherited a design program at my university in January, and I feel like all these conversations are magnified even more so, not just within organizations, but externally all over social media and with messaging. And so we wanted to sort of bring you all here today, and Sandy, you in particular, to be able to sort of unpack a little bit about what's happening currently. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and we are at the beginning of a full-blown new civil rights era, which is really starting to unpack a lot of systemic racism, police brutality, all the isms, right? All the bad things that have been sort of like festering underneath, white supremacy has now risen to the top. And you can say that it's been going back to our last presidential cycle. We can say it's gone back 400 years. But really, when we're talking about the context of design, we really want to sort of think about how that's sort of shaping where we are now, how we got to this point, and where we can move in the future. So with that, I wanted to just sort of start the conversation by asking you a question that I feel like is probably an elephant in the room for a lot of organizations that are represented in our audience, which is after George Floyd was brutally murdered by a white police officer, we started a new conversation around civil rights, police brutality, defunding the police, Black Lives Matter. And a few weeks ago, a lot of organizations started to put out messaging statements and position statements about what their take on the current Black Lives Matter movement was, whether it was in an outwards like post in solidarity, whether it was a black square on a Instagram or LinkedIn page. But when you look at those posts on the outside, it's about allyship, right? The positioning of it or the optics of it are, we are behind you, we support Black voices. But when you really looked deeper in those organizations, and sometimes these were in the comment section, sometimes it was in conversation with other people, there are a lot of folks who are part of or have relationships with these organizations that call bullshit on these posts, right? And
Yes.
so the question is for IDEO, when you all put out your statement, and I think we can maybe get into a little bit about what you all said and how that's reflecting in your organization externally, you all were subject to the same sort of critique, right? So the question is, I'm going to use a word that Ricardo Gomez gave me, is IDEO jumping on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon as the sort of like pinnacle of design research as a design company that really sort of upholds in some ways the white supremacist model of design through design thinking, or is this coming from a position of authenticity from the organization?
This is an amazing question, and honestly, I really hope this is our next many years of conversation. I feel like 20 minutes doesn't do the depth of that question justice, but I'll start on that. I think the first thought I have there is, to be honest, like, we would rather actually do the work than be publicizing it. At the same time, so for anybody who hasn't seen, we laid out not just a statement, but a set of commitments. And we have gotten a lot of feedback about, that this question about, is this just marketing? Also, a lot of people talking about what their experience might have been like working at IDEO. And while I'd love to be focused on doing the work and not putting it out there publicly, I also think that instinct is part of the problem. So we have been asking these questions of ourselves for a long time, both in our organization and in design, but we've been quiet about it. And actually, without being open about it, without these kind of like reinforcing systems, without other people knowing that we care, we're not in the center of this conversation either, right? And so we're on the side, kind of hidden, like being safe about it. And so we made a decision to say, even though we've made commitments internally, we're going to put them externally so that we can actually have that conversation with more people. And that part of that is about like creating accountability systems. Part of that is actually creating a dialogue about where we believe design will go. And to us, that was the sort of beginning of saying, we're ready to be in that conversation more openly.
Yeah, and within your list of commitments, you sort of cover some things that I think we're going to talk about a little bit more in our conversation, which is sort of your commitment to sort of talent, training, community, design, and culture, which I really want to get into this culture question in a second. But how are you planning on holding yourselves accountable as an organization beyond just this external posting listing on your commitments page? But how will we know that you're making meaningful moves towards being a really great ally as an organization throughout all of your practice?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we're doing is making sure we get our house in order about like even how we're constructed and creating new spaces for that dialogue internally. So number one is just actually be in that conversation within IDEO consistently. And one of the things that we did when we designed this, what I would call them like a starter set of commitments, is we really thought about how do we not just make these about a moment, but make sure they are the beginnings of the movement. We've heard that a lot today, and I get very excited when I hear that, because the risk right now is that it feels like the moment. So when we wrote these commitments, we thought about we will not post a commitment unless we know there's ownership of how it will advance. We also thought about how do we design these commitments for longevity, not just right now. So make sure they have years of commitment within each commitment. We also have been thinking about how do we organize ourselves, not just for any of these things to exist from our talent organization, which, by the way, they've been doing an amazing job over the last few years, opening up the space for us and helping us evolve some of our hiring practices and our training practices. But in a way, they've been doing this Herculean work, and actually we need to get that embedded way more throughout the organization. So we're doing things like building a new leadership circle internally that is really about making sure that people of color, and in particular, Black and Brown people within IDEO, who also have experience advancing DE&I conversations or anti-racist work, either within IDEO or outside of IDEO, can come to a space together to help manage the development of these commitments and where else they take us. And so these are some of the things we're designing to help us, but I really, want to underscore it's the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that I appreciate your honesty and sort of saying that you have not done as well as you could have in the past, right? You sort of failed at being, the past version of IDEO has not really been a part of this conversation, has not been quite as intentional.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reflection that a lot of companies are hearing today is that you can say whatever you want to today. We'll see what you do in the future.
Yes.
But there's a lot to sort of atone to and answer for in terms of like why there is not that representation and inclusivity within your culture today. So maybe we can also maybe talk a little bit about IDEO in terms of I'm just going to put out there as a failure in terms of your hiring, retaining, and promotion practices, and how you plan on sort of shifting and moving that needle forward. And I think looking at ways that you're doing that could maybe offer lessons to other companies that are trying to be as intentional about the same and maybe don't know where to start.
Yes.
So the question is like, where are the Black IDEO designers?
Yeah. Yes. Well, maybe some history, because I think it connects to what a lot of people have been talking about today. IDEO was founded over 40 years ago by a group of white men, and that's reflective of the time, but still true to this day, right? And there was this kind of spirit of founding IDEO so that they could work with their friends. And obviously what happens over time then when you have a group of white men is when you hire your friends, they tend to be other white men, and so on and so on and so on. And we grow through networks, and our networks actually often really look like us. And so we recognize that as part of the foundational story that has produced this failure, as you're pointing out, rightfully so. So I guess maybe to offer kind of on the question of what are some lessons that other companies might learn? I would say, it might have taken us too long to even recognize the problem, but I would say that problem started much more overtly being discussed a long time ago within IDEO's walls. So probably 6 or 7 years ago. And 3 or so years ago, we had an external consultant come in, help kind of hold a mirror up to us about not just our makeup, but the culture. And we've been steadily acting on those recommendations, but still it's insufficient. And so in a lot of ways, like we have an amazingly long way to go, both from a hiring from a retention, from a promotion perspective, but also from creating a culture of belonging. And what my hope is about what this time does offer us is the accelerant for that transformation. And that's what we feel committed to.
And I guess the question is, does it need to be Black folks dying in the streets to accelerate these kinds of changes within institutions? Like, at what point does an internal study or an internal, like, you know, consultant coming in and telling you what you really can already know, you probably heard from employees, when does that change into something that's tangible, not only on the inside, but also palpable on the outside from people that are looking to you as role models as an organization in terms of your role in leadership within design?
Yeah, totally fair and right question. I guess what I would offer is that what we're all benefiting from right now is the dismantling of systems. And I know a lot of people have been doing that work. A lot of people on the call today have been. But in a way that is creating a greater opening for us to jump faster. And, you know, I guess there's a difficult position when you're 40 years in and you have had a lot of success on an old way. I'm not defending this, by the way, I'm admitting this, right? It's actually quite scary to let go of the old ways because you don't know what will make up your success in the future. And I think what this moment has really offered us is it doesn't matter, because we won't be successful without an evolution. And so it's does it have to take, you know, so many Black people being killed at the hands of police? I want to say no, but it's also created a larger cultural dismantling and actually an honesty for us to talk about these dynamics of power, these dynamics of supremacy that now allow us to really say, because now that we can see it so much more clearly because we're talking about it, all the constraints are gone. We're in the middle of a pandemic too. That's like showing us that all the truths we held about how we work, what it means to collaborate, all of that's being dismantled too. And we're all becoming kind of a lot more raw to like opening up to like, so what's the new world that we construct? And I guess that is, yeah, I mean, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that, Raja.
Well, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Which is looking at dismantling sort of like this supremacist structure within that IDEO sort of has held literally the example of. How does that trickle down to also the proliferation of design thinking globally?
Totally.
And I think you can read article after article about what design thinking being grounded in white supremacy, and is it really upholding a white supremacist model? And is the role of empathy really legitimate when if we had more diversity, it would not require that? And just reflecting on something that Jasmine said earlier, when she presented talking about, you know, her ability to sort of navigate the diaspora as a Black presenting female was much more different than her white counterparts coming in and also trying to empathize with the community and design on their behalf, right? So designing for and with yourself or co-designing, we know that there's strengths there. And so as you're looking at sort of opening up this organization for true transformation, do you think that that would also maybe transform itself or translate into also redefining what we now know as design thinking, which is practiced across industries, right? It's not just a design thing anymore.
Totally. Yes, yes, and yes. So, and actually, again, this conference is, and all the discussions we're having are evidence of that. And I really recognize the questions of, is design thinking, you know, like a white supremacist tool? And I guess in the hands of white people who want to maintain power, it is. And, you know, I really loved how Dory talked about this morning around design has both been the mechanism of harm that has been brought to the Black community. At the same time, it's the tools we can use to dismantle that. And so I do think that we're about to see what I would call like a much bigger expansion on how we understand what design even is. And I guess the thing that I hope that we can all be ready for is welcoming nuance into our lives a little bit more. So a thing I feel like I'm reflecting a lot on about the past is IDEO and other institutions like IDEO in believing that more people can and should have access to design, codified design thinking as if it were a process. And it made it seem like okay, if you just do these steps, all good, without even really recognizing the question of who's doing the work and also what the work is that we're doing. And so that commodification, in order to help people access it, is oversimplified. And so I think one of the biggest things is a lot of the tools have been built as if we're designing for other people. And they sound like we have the power and we're designing for them, those people over there, right? But a lot of design work happens more like what a lot of us talk about as design with, that we hand in hand with people in communities. But increasingly, even there's designing by, where as designers, we can actually help facilitate others within communities to do the design work themselves. And so that range hasn't yet, in a way, been codified so that more and more people can access that range. And maybe, Raja, if you would, there are a couple of points that come up to me about the problems in some of that codification. So if I can just
and I think that I
would
love for you to do this reflection, especially since it's your process or ideology. I would love for you to maybe dig in a little bit deeper on where you think the other issues lie within it. And I also appreciate your voice as someone who worked in education space to be able to talk about how design thinking is applied outside of just traditional graphic design, product design, industrial design, UX design, right? I think it's nice to hear your perspective, and also how when you have employed it as someone who is a designer for IDEO versus how you feel the rest of the world should really be understanding how to take this codified process and to use it in a way that is meaningful and is not going to be reductionary into taking everybody down to their base roles as someone who's received and someone who gives.
Yes, totally. I really think that the work in education taught me that so deeply. It's really clear that in schools in particular, having people from outside and far away determine what happens within a community feels really misaligned. A lot of the work that we've done with schools has really been about helping people kind of open up to new ways of owning and solving the problems that exist in their system. And so I guess maybe a thing that, and by the way, I don't say that to say that we've solved it. I say it to say that that is a continual reflective question to make sure that we understand what legitimate role we can play as designers, which is not everything. And that's not always historically how IDEO has shown up. I think our culture has really had like a, what, you've got a problem, we've got a process. And that's not always relevant. That's not always true. And we shouldn't always be the ones who are designing. So that is a line we're always trying to think about now. And in different pockets of our work that has come up earlier or more recently. So you may not hear that consistently from the voice of IDEO because in a way it's happening in different edges of IDEO. But there are two things that really, really stand out to me. I know there's a lot of conversation about empathy and, empathy is not enough, empathy is not a step. And I couldn't agree more with that idea that in a way, like empathy is the quest, right? Like what we are trying to do, we can never understand the experiences that anybody else has, but we can seek to, right? And that doesn't mean we get there, but that we can approach a question with that humility. And part of that then includes, am I even the right person to be involved? And, I think about a lesson I learned from Antoinette Carroll a few years ago, where she talked about the difference between equity designers and design allies. That equity designers really have the lived experience of the circumstance that you're designing for. And, you know, like design allies, in a way, have like privilege and access to be able to help equity designers with the work that they're doing. And that's like a post-it in my brain around kind of, as we ask the question, like, is that right for us to be involved, or can we tee up other people to be involved? That's one bucket of conversation, I think, on empathy. Design thinking is not limited to a process. It is like an endlessly expanding investigation, and empathy is a quest, not a step.
I think that you said something that was really important there, which was this idea of humility needs to be also seen as part and parcel of this first step. And as much as I can say, there's a lot of ways in which empathy is not enough. I do think that teaching a level of humility might be another way of maybe approaching just your approach to design and people that you're working with overall, right? And I think humility, even if you on the outside identify similarly to the people that you're working with, there's still a lot of things to unpack in terms of identity, which really make true empathy possible. And so I guess the question I would also keep pushing back on is IDEO committed to really trying to diversify their pool of designers so that instead of working on aspiring to be empathetic, teaching humility to non-BIPOC folks, could it not shortcut this step by hiring more people?
Definitely.
The identities of the communities that you're working with and the clientele that you're working with?
Definitely. We have not hired enough people of color. We have not hired enough Black people. It is, I really appreciated some of the earlier conversations that Elaine went through about like how, you know, the kinds of things that we hear, you know, in different organizations around this. For sure, we've been through probably every quote, you know, that she cited. So here we are saying, for sure, we have not hired enough people that represent multiple diverse backgrounds, given the scale of challenges that we're working on, for sure. I think that what I'd love to also be in is a conversation about like why that matters. And I think there's a great, you know, like link to that guidance from Antoinette around like really recognizing that lived experience is different than empathy. But I've been having a conversation with one of my mentors, Tracy Worley, who's a designer within IDEO, and I was like, how can we expand this conversation into the why? And one of the things that we started talking about was, you know, design process and the way that we've codified it. It's all been about the external steps. Here are the things you do: interview people, you know, like put a bunch of Post-its on the wall and group them. Like they're all the things that are observable. But there are these things that are not observable that happen between each of those steps. It's insight and it's imagination. And we never talk about that because those things kind of feel like mysteries. And what Tracy helped me really kind of like see in a really pointed way is imagination is not neutral. What we can imagine is defined through the experiences we have, which is defined through the bodies that we hold, which connects to the skin that we have. And that's why we need a different makeup at IDEO.
And I think that's beautiful. That's beautiful perspective. Yeah.
So, yes. Yeah.
Hello, I'm back. I really enjoyed that conversation. I was so into this conversation that I forgot that I was moderating. I'm not moderating this thing, being the host. And I was just like, oh, that's such a good perspective. And then the silence was there and I was like, oh, like I have to jump in.
Like, oh, Mitzi is here. That must mean that our time is up.
I didn't realize that you were there. I was about to ask another question, but okay. Are we out of time? Are we out of time?
I think we are out of time, unfortunately. But I was really enjoying this conversation. And thank you, Sandy, for coming to the table as a major design firm. It really means a lot to be transparent about the journey of diversifying a place like IDEO. And so seriously, thank you for that. And thank you to you, Raja, you're such a gem, for having this conversation and asking the, really tough and uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, and thanks, Sandy, for being really willing to be called on the carpet.
Of course. And I mean, I really hope this isn't the end of that conversation. Today for this conference, we should go on. But in general, I feel like, as I said, this is the beginning of a really open conversation for our next era. So.
I think that's a great setup for our next session, right? Mitzi?
Oh yeah, but we have a tiny break in between. So, so we're gonna have a 5-minute break so we can refresh our bodies. But I want to continue, keeping in our minds that we're focused on the goals of today and basically this conversation. So let's break for 5 minutes and I will see you guys really soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Raja. Thanks, Mitzi.
Thanks.
Thanks.